Namaskar and thank you for joining us on our weekly program on geoeconomics. The US national debt has crossed $34 trillion. It happened at the start of 2024. The US Treasury Department said on its official website that over the past 100 years, the US federal debt has increased from $404 billion in 1923 to $33.17 trillion in 2023. It is currently at 34.01 trillion US dollars. So in this is this, something called the boiling frog phenomenon for the US economy. A boiling frog syndrome is that if, the heat of the water that a frog is in or is put in is increased slowly, then the frog just boils and dies. But conversely, if it's thrown into hot water, then it just jumps out. So has the US debt reached unsustainable levels? And what impact will it have on the global economy? After all, we know that the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. So to discuss this, we have with us two guests. Professor Prasar Bharati will be joining us. He's a professor of accounting and finance at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. And we have with us Dr. N.R. Bhanumurthy, who's the Vice Chancellor of the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bengaluru. Professor Bhanumurthy, is the US debt unsustainable? Some data estimates have put the US economy to be valued at about $27 trillion now.
Well, if you talk about the concept of unsustainability, there's very clearly it brings down to the two variables. One is the nominal GDP growth and the interest rate that is going to be paid. But if you look at the data for both the variables for the past 15 years, it clearly says that GDP growth, nominal GDP growth is higher than the interest rate. So to that extent, it is clearly sustainable. But I think going forward, whether this is going to be sustainable or not is a big question for all of us. And I think it will have, as you rightly pointed out, it will have a huge repercussions on the global economy and more for the trading partners like India and other countries. So I think we need to really look at what's happening in United States fiscal condition.
Professor Bhanumurthy, should the US look at increasing taxes or, cutting down on expenses that are seen as entitlements and don't have a multiplier effect at the current time?
Well, I think these are the things that they need to really look at right now. But unfortunately, what happened last year, they have actually, both the parties, Republicans and Democrats, were unanimously postponed that the long-term fiscal responsibility act, which would have actually made them to sit down and look at what are the expenditures they can really cut down and what are the areas where they can generate little more resources. So it has been postponed until 2025. So I'm not really sure that the US is going to look at this particular issue right now, and only we have to look at what happens in 2025.
Okay. Professor Bhanumurthy, we are waiting for Professor Bharati to join us, but till then you'll have to take all the questions. So both the parties in the U.S. They dominate the U.S. politics. That's the Democrats and the Republicans. As you've mentioned, that they have agreed to waive the debt ceiling till January of 2025. So a new administration is going to take office in January of 2025. The question is whether the debt ceiling itself should be done away with. What do you think?
Well, I think now that we have reached this level of debt, you have to add one more sentence there. The United States debt level is much, much higher than what they experienced during the World War.
Yes.
So I think that is the severity that we have right now when it comes to United States debt. And in terms of looking at all this, I would only feel that markets don't really punish at the moment because they only just did that downgrading the bond rating from AAA to AA plus. But I think even that markets are not really reacted really much. So in that sense, we have to be much more. We have to look at this particular situation a little more carefully. Having said that, you talked about boiling frog. In fact, there is another way to explain is that, you look at the obesity. You know that, you're increasing your size of the body, but you don't see
The weight
the
gain.
repercussions that happens in the long run. So I think, Mark, one important aspect here is public debt is a stock variable. And unlike the GDP numbers and other variables, which is a flow variable, public debt is something that normally the policymakers and markets neglect for a long time. And I think that's what happened in many countries in the world. So they think that they can bypass, they postpone those issues for the future. But I think even in the context of emerging market economies like ours, I think we need to really focus. One variable that we need to focus on a regular basis is the public debt to GDP ratio.
Okay.
So that we don't get into this unsustainable level in the long run.
Right. Uh, well, I mean, initially you did say that it was sustainable because of the size of the US economy. But the Center for American Progress, Professor Bhanumurthy, it's a center left think tank. Now, it argues that the tax cuts during the Bush and Trump administrations, they have resulted in the debt growing by around $10 trillion. But the Republicans, on the other hand, think that they have to cut the expenses. They say they are excessive under the Democrats. That's the practical way of reducing the debt. Now, are they looking at this issue seriously enough? Because they have to put economics before politics, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, I think just before that, I just wanted to add when I said long-term sustainability,
Yeah.
I think there are predictions right now by the budget office itself
Right.
that next 3 to 4 years, the fiscal deficit would actually go up to double digit. In fact, by 2030, you're going to see a continuous increase in the fiscal debt to GDP ratio at 10%, which is we have not experienced that kind of a deficit levels in the United States. So that's what when I mean that in the long run,
Yes.
it can become unsustainable
Unsustainable.
that sense. So we need to start looking at from now onwards. That is exactly what all the fiscal responsibility legislators, even in India, that FRBM Act
Yes.
actually focuses on the long-term issues, but we always try to postpone that and we get into all sorts of issues. But when it comes to this regarding the politics and economics, I think 2024 is a year for is almost like a risk for democratic countries like United States and India and many other countries. So there are many countries are going for elections in the current year.
Yes.
So I'm not really sure whether economics will be given priority in the election year. And as I just pointed out to you that there was a bipartisan support for postponing the FRA, that is
Right.
Fiscal Responsibility Act. So I don't think either the Republicans or Democrats are going to sit together and look at what are the expenditure that they need to tighten. Having said that, it also has put pressure on United States
Right.
in terms of funding the global geopolitics, like
Absolutely.
talked about
Absolutely.
Ukraine and Russia, or we talk about Israel and Gaza. So I think there is some kind of it will actually lead to geopolitical issue also going forward if they
Right.
don't really
Sure.
support those countries. Yeah.
We are also joined by Professor Bapat. Professor Bapat is from the is a professor of finance at the IIT Bombay. Thank you very much, Professor Bapat. Let me just ask you: already the world is witnessing, an attempt to move away from the U.S. dollar, which is the reserve currency. So, should countries be thinking then of replacing dollars with an alternative currency or gold?
Yeah, this is true. In fact, this should have happened right in 1971 when dollar lost its gold backing. But then it kept on continuing for a very long. But post 2008, world is working on it actually. But post the crisis of 2020, Corona hitting China and also US, I think this movement is very active and rising debt on US is definitely going to see major changes, and world over technological changes also ensure that there is now possibility of direct transactions We know that India has already taken lead. China and other countries are also taking lead. So one can definitely say that the importance of dollar will definitely go down as a reserve currency for the whole world. And people today talk about basket of currencies rather than
Yes.
only about dollars. And I'm sure the percentage of trade routed through dollar will go down the line.
Professor Bapat, how does the US debt actually impact countries that have taken measures already to stabilize their own currencies and avoid inflation, getting out of control by either substituting their own currencies for the dollar or pegging their currencies to the dollar?
True, because US is the biggest spender in the world. So it happens to be largest customer for example, Indian IT companies. It is the largest customer for manufacturing companies, especially in China. And it is expected that there will be some tightening of economy in the US. I'm not sure whether it will happen considering that it's an election year immediately, but it will surely happen in next 2 3 years, and that will impact IT companies in India, for example. It will also impact export of luxury goods from India. And similarly, for many countries, there will be a likelihood of overall dampening of world economy when US tries to tighten its expenditure. Secondly, there are two major investors in US debt, which are Japan and China. So if dollar really devalues, these two current countries also lose because they are holding assets in the form of US dollars. So
Yes.
it will be interesting how it impacts their economies as well.
Uh, Professor Bhanumurthy, more than 65 countries actually peg their currencies to the US dollar. Five US territories also, 11 foreign countries use the dollar as an official currency. So, Professor Bhanumurthy, that's quite a large area of direct influence. When we talk about the indirect influence, then, you were actually talking a little bit earlier about that. What is the indirect influence then?
Well, I think that's the reason why this is called, global currency. And as you rightly pointed out, there are many countries actually peg their local currency with U.S. exchange rate. Having said that, one of the reasons why U.S. continue to be confident, even though the debt levels have gone up very high, they think that the exchange rate is going to be a better stabilizer. For example, right now, the dollar has weakened, but what happens is that because of that, there could be a reversal of trade flows, which will be in favor of United States. So, in a sense, I think the exchange rate certainly plays a major role. And as Professor Bapat pointed out, it's very important for other countries like India and others to look at other source of global currency. In fact, India is actually trying to play that game, and we have seen that how some of the trade has been, contracted in the rupee-denominated trade. So there's
Yes.
some movement has actually happened, and I think. Having said that, it's going to be a very long period for us to look at the declining US currency dominance in the global financial markets.
Okay.
Again, as Professor Bapat pointed out, if there is any slowdown or any weakening of the currency, I think the people who are holding that currency will also get affected. So in a sense, we are in an interconnected world, and exchange rate plays is a big leveler for all these countries who are trading together.
Professor Bapat, the U.S. Has carried debt, in fact, since its inception. It doesn't seem to be wanting to pay it off. It just keeps on servicing the debt, paying interest. Is this actually even a responsible way of doing things? Does it not make financial sense to balance your books at some stage?
If we look at theory of public finance, which is generally advocated, especially by US, it is that there is no problem if government spends more, because idea is it's used for creating infrastructure, it creates more jobs, and it also increases GDP. But in case of US, see, in 1945, they had about 46% of GDP as debt. Then it went down to around 30% by 1981. But after that, it has been shooting up and it's almost 125% of GDP now. So I think it has crossed that level, and now new debt is being taken to repay the old debt or to pay for interest obligations. And less is being used for creating of infrastructure or for creation of job. So I'm sure this level of debt for so many years it might not have affected, especially till 90s, but in last 10 years it is being felt and it will be increasingly felt in coming 10-15 years.
The US debt had actually sort of reached 100% in 2013. After that, it's gone well above 100% of the size of their economy. So shouldn't they have taken measures from that stage itself?
No, I would like to add one more point,
Yes.
that for so long time, almost all trade used to happen in dollar. There was need for one currency. But we should understand that with technological development, cryptocurrencies coming up, with UPI and direct electronic payment, the need for a reserve currency itself has gone down now.
Yes.
World is changing. So people are less and less dependent on dollar, and that is definitely going to impact the position of US as a strategic influencer.
Okay.
So less and less economies would actually be dependent on dollar, and the current capacity of US to print n number of dollars but not getting affected because their inflation doesn't increase. But down the line in coming years, it will affect them because they would be faced with more and more inflation, and being a democratic country, they would have to avoid it. So it will be double sided. On one side, if they try to increase taxes, people are unhappy. But if they allow more debt funding because of rising inflations, people will be unhappy. So I'm sure US politicians will have tough times in coming years.
Professor Bhanumurthy, now the US debt is larger than the size of the economies of the next five countries: China, Germany, Japan, India, and the UK combined. So, I mean, from a layman's point of view, it looks unsurmountable. I mean, it looks huge. Where is the money going to come from to pay it? Because, I mean, if you have to try and collect it, if we look, like paying a home loan or something, you pay it over so many years. Imagine the US economy trying to pay this over how many years will they take to pay it back?
Well, I think this is the issue that every country has to. There are many countries in the world which is having debt to GDP levels much more than 100%. So I think when it comes to United States, one way is that going forward we do expect the interest rate cycle to come down, and maybe the interest burden will also come down on the overall debt. But I think they need to revert back to that Fiscal Responsibility Act, which actually has a good framework to look at how they can rationalize their expenditures and also look at other revenues for mobilizing resources through taxes or non-taxes. I think that's something, and it's going to be a very long drawn process. That's what I started telling in the beginning,
Yes.
that public debt is a stock variable, and once it increases above that whatever the level,
Threshold level, yeah.
bringing down going to be extremely painful, and it's going to be, the adjustment has to be both on the revenues as well as expenditure, and unfortunately 2024 being that election year for many of the democratic countries, I'm not really sure that US is going to look at. Maybe I think last time what happened, US was about to default on some of the debt. So if something happens like that in 2025, and I think there could be some kind of realignment in the global financial order. So I think that something can shake up the whole the debt issue in the United States. So we should look forward for that kind of trends in the future. Yeah.
Professor Bhanumurthy, one estimate states that we're talking about repayment now, that if every household in the US pays $1,000 a month for 22 years, it's going to be a little bit okay. I mean, they have the chance to pay off the debt. Every household, so $12,000 per year for the next 22 years. So is raising funds even possible in the US system, which is high consumption? People always live off, credit. The whole idea of generating demand is through taking loans and stuff like that. Is that ever going to change?
Yeah, I think the current debt level should actually make all of them relook at the whole public finances and fiscal policies. And as Professor Bapat already pointed out, I think it has actually started worsening from 2008, especially after the global financial crisis. Now, I don't think the United States have actually learned lesson from the global financial crisis and the aftermath and what happened in the global economy. And I think they continue to follow the similar policies even during the COVID-19 period. In fact, India has done slightly differently compared to what advanced countries have done. And I think maybe India's experience can be a great lesson for some of the advanced countries like United States. We have did completely different from what we have done in 2008. And that is one of the reasons why India could balance both real GDP as well as inflation much better than many other countries. So I think
Okay.
they need to really look at the whole, relook at the whole, the fiscal policy and the whole
Sure.
macro relationship. Otherwise, I think they'll continue to face this problem.
India is now in the Amrit Kal. We are at a stage where we are looking at rapid growth for the next 25 years. Our economy is going to fast become the third largest economy, and after that, we are looking at developing, becoming a developed country by the year 2047, with the size of an economy which is probably equivalent to the current US economy size. So that kind of growth is what we are looking at. But I'm saying that if the US is going to suffer, since it's the largest economy, China is already suffering because it's having demographic problems. They're reaching certain problems with diminishing returns and things like that. At this point of time, will that affect India?
Yeah, I think we need to be very clear with the how what are the determinants of our India's GDP growth. So if you look at it, the major part actually at least almost 20% of the GDP actually comes from the demand from the global
Domestic.
economy, global. So if the United States and other advanced countries are not doing well, I think one of the first hit would be on India's service sector exports. So I think that is going to be very difficult for India to grow at 9 to 10% growth, which we are aspiring to become the developed nation by 2047. So if you want to really grow at 9 and 10%, I think we need to see that our trading partners are also growing, in a decent way.
Right.
And again, as Professor Bapat already pointed out, many of our manufacturing sector also depends on, the United States. By the way, not many people know that we actually run trade surplus with United States. So, in that sense, if there's anything that happened in the United States, I think it will have repercussions on our external account, current
Yes.
account deficit, as well as other service sector growth. So
Okay.
we need to grow
Right.
together. There is no much
Sure.
option. Yeah.
Right. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. N.R. Bhanumurthy, Vice Chancellor of B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bengaluru, and Professor Varadaraj Bapat, Professor of Accounting and Finance at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. So in conclusion, let's just say this, that the US debt is already near $3 trillion above the last ceiling of a little more than $31 trillion, which was surpassed less than a year ago. So it's clear that the US's predominant role also in global affairs that Professor Bhanumurthy was talking about has come at a cost for the US Treasury. Despite coming out of Afghanistan, it's now diverting funds to Ukraine and the Middle East. The US actually contributes about $17 billion annually to the upkeep of international organizations, the UN and the like, and it spends around the same amount on its own federal government-run institutions within the US. The Biden administration claims that it claims credit through its spending in the social sector for the boost in the GDP. They say it's gone up by more than 5% from 2022 to 2024. Of course, the Republicans don't see it that way. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.